This video is an introduction to the MuxDisplay package for Julia. So this is just something that I wrote for the situation where I'm working on a remote workstation via SSH and Tmux, and I need to see graphical output from, let's say, plots.jl, and I can't use X forwarding or anything like that. So instead, I want to use the ability of my terminal emulator to show graphics. So on my laptop, I have to be running a terminal that supports graphics output. In this case, I'm using WezTerm, but you could also use iTerm or Kitty or a bunch of other modern terminal emulators, just not the built-in terminal. Okay, so let's zoom into that. And now we're going to SSH into the workstation and connect to a Tmux session. So here, as an example, I'm going to use a tutorial markdown file from the plots.jl package. So we'll open that up and we'll make a few splits with the REPL at the bottom here. So we'll have the markdown file in Vim on the left, and we'll use the Slime plugin for Vim to take text from the markdown file and execute it in the REPL. Now to set that up, we have to tell the plugin the number of the pane where we want to send the text. And there's a shortcut in Tmux to show the pane number. So my Tmux prefix is Ctrl-J. So I type Ctrl-J and then Q to show these numbers. And then we'll put that in here. And in the REPL, we set it an environment variable so we don't get errors from plots because there's no display on the workstation directly. And then we'll load the MuxDisplay package to set that up using the Tmux panel in the upper right with the ID 1 as the graphics output. Okay, so we see how this is set up. And the basic idea is that anytime there's a command in the REPL with graphical output, that output is going to be saved to a PNG file in this temporary directory. And then that file is going to be displayed in an ImageCat program that's going to be run in the display panel in the top right. So what that command is depends on your terminal emulator. So in this example, we're using a WezTerm helper tool that's installed on the workstation that handles showing images via the iTerm protocol. And it gets the size information of the display panel, which is also where this n rows equal to 1 comes in. So that's actually the default. So it's just to tell it that we want to use the entire panel for a single plot. And that's really the unique concept here, is that we have a dedicated panel for showing the image, because there's other solutions for showing graphics directly inline in the REPL, like XixelTerm or iTerm to images or Kitty terminal images. So these are all Julia packages. But I find that those have a lot of problems with the image placement in the particular context of Tmux, where you have multiple panes in a single window. Now, that being said, we do still have to make sure that Tmux doesn't get in the way of the image data and the terminal emulator. So you do need a very recent version of Tmux, and you also have to set up an option in your Tmux configuration called OSC pass-through. All right. So now we just start executing code from the markdown file in the REPL, and we'll basically just see the output of the plot pop up in the image pane. And we can go to another part of the markdown file with more complicated plots and run those as well. So every time there's a plot command, that just gets displayed. All right, so that works pretty nicely, but you can scroll back to previous images, and you also lose the output if you switch between Tmux windows. And also, depending on your terminal emulator, you can run into problems with the image really going into the exact right position on the display pane. So if you're using WezTerm, like we're doing here, WezTerm actually also has a multiplexing feature that could basically replace Tmux. And personally, I tend to have a lot of different sessions for different projects running at the workstation at the same time. And the WezTerm multiplexer doesn't really have the same context of sessions, so I don't generally use WezTerm in that way. If you do, like if you don't have to use Tmux at all, then you can get around a lot of these problems with inline images, and then you probably don't have to use the MuxDisplay package at all. But anyway, there's so here I still want to use Tmux as the main multiplexer, where I run the Julia REPL, but we can use the WezTerm multiplexer in addition to that, just for the display window. All right, so let's see how that looks like. So we open a second WezTerm window, and we make this SSH MUX connection to the workstation that you can read about in the WezTerm documentation. And then what I also like to do is I like to pin this window to the front, so WezTerm has a feature for that, and I also have a shortcut to get rid of the tab bar. Okay. So now in the Tmux session, we get rid of the display pane. And that actually that changes the pane numbers. So we'll have to reconfigure that in Slime. So let's just sort of set up the new pane number, which is now pane number 1 instead of pane number 2. And we can double check that. All right, so pane number 1. And just like the Tmux pane, the WezTerm window has an ID, and we can get that ID from an environment variable. Right? And then we need to put that into the MuxDisplay configuration. And now we can rerun the plotting commands. And the nice thing is that we can scroll back now, and the images basically stay around. So this whole idea also works on an iPad. So there's a really excellent app called Blink that's a terminal for remote SSH connections, and that app also supports image display. But that's actually the other reason that I'm not using WezTerm as a multiplexer, because with Tmux I can just switch between the MacBook and the iPad seamlessly, whereas WezTerm, there's no WezTerm for the iPad. So that's actually a big reason why I'm sticking to a solution where the multiplexing is mainly done in Tmux. All right, but so we can SSH into the workstation and attach to the Tmux session on the iPad now. So even though Blink has image support, it's a lot buggier than with WezTerm, and it doesn't really work to get the placement right when you have these multiple panes per window. So instead, we'll do basically the same idea as with the second WezTerm window, but with the second window that's a completely separate Tmux session. So now on the iPad, we open up a second Blink window and slide over, and we'll also SSH into the workstation on there, and we'll we'll create a completely separate Tmux session, and we'll make the text size really small, so that the Tmux tab bar doesn't take up so much space. Okay, and now we can set up the MuxDisplay to point to that new Tmux session. So we'll set the target pane with the name of the Tmux session. And because the slide over window is so narrow, we set n rows to 3 to have a geometry where we get 3 plots in that vertical space. And we also set clear to false so that the screen doesn't get cleared before plots. So this is kind of exploiting a bug in Blink, but it ends up giving this pretty nice scrolling behavior. So after we generate a few plots, you'll sort of see that you sort of get this sort of really nice effect here. Now, if this narrow slide over window is too small, we can also make a proper split view and rearrange the Tmux panels. And then we set the number of rows to 2, so that will basically just give us bigger plots in the plots window. All right, now if we rerun that, we get nice big plots. Well, and that's basically it. So this is how you use the MuxDisplay package to see your plots over SSH.